Seek above all for a game worth playing. Oh baby, it's witchcraft contagious. I felt it for ages. We're out of these cages in this house of mages. It's witchcraft, it's dangerous. Beware of these pages. There's spells of all flavors in this house of mages. In this house of mages. In this house of mages.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Irulian Cumming. I am a mischievous mage, a lover of wisdom, a seeker of mysteries, and a ritual embodiment yoga teacher trainer, amongst a myriad of many other weird and wonderful things. In this episode, I chat once again with the Dark Wizard and the founder of the Esoteric Entrepreneur Academy, Dane Thomas. I've introduced Dane in a much more in-depth way in the previous episode we recorded together, so if you haven't listened to that, I highly recommend going and giving it a listen sometime. I've linked it in the show notes. For now, we're going to get straight into the conversation. So back by popular demand, I have the wizard Dane Thomas with me today. How are you, brother?
Hey, man. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on again. So there's a whole bunch of things that I want to chat to you today about. So I'll try to knock them all out in like a succinct kind of order. But I thought I'd get straight to it. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is this idea of like a history of lineage kind of thing, right? And I don't see that much in a lot of the New Age community and these people with modalities and stuff. And that was actually something I noticed like early on because I love unpacking systems. And so when I got into magic, I actually was researching all these different like history, like PhD-based books on history of magic before I even tried anything and started dabbling with it. And so when I first read Clear Your Shit, your book that was like introducing to the spiral, I loved that you actually offered all the things that influence you in creating that and basically like, hey, this is how I created it. Feel free to like, so I got all the other books and like I like tracing the lines, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I actually don't see that much happening at all. In fact, I see the opposite in that instead of people saying, oh, I like did the training with this, who got influenced by this, got influenced by this. They're like, I just downloaded this. From
100%.
You know, I went to Egypt and I just got a download and now I just created this modality. It's like, okay, but like, you know, you must have got influence from somewhere. So yeah, I really, had a lot of respect for you for doing that. And it definitely kind of satiated my mad scientist, like kind of wanting to unravel things. So yeah, I'd love to just chat to like, why do you think that is? Do you think people that don't want to admit that they've taken it from other things, that they don't realize that's what's happening, or yeah, just whatever your point of view on that is, man?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I've had a few people teach me that the classy way is to attribute where you got things from, you know, and I studied comparative religion at university. I came up through hip hop and hip hop culture. And even when I got into marketing, my early marketing mentors were like, you know, it's classy to attribute where you got things from. We all get things from places and it doesn't make you look dumb, makes you look smarter if you say, my teacher, blah, 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 taught me this, or my friend, blah, 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 taught me this, or such and such in 1950 created this, or whatever, you know? And I think maybe people weren't taught that that's the classy thing to do, you know? You know, in hip hop culture, there's this idea of you don't bite, you don't just steal shit, right? You borrow and you integrate it, but you give a nod to where you got it from. And it's very kind of in sort of 1970s and early 80s New York hip hop culture, they called it biting. And I got someone who explained to me, it's like, you know, someone who just takes a bite out of the apple and they don't really acknowledge the whole thing. They don't really explain that this is part of a rich tradition or, you know, and I meet people all the fucking time. And I mean, people who've come off my work, people who've done lots of other things. And it's like, yeah, I just had, like you said, I have a download, I channeled this thing. It's like, yeah, you did channel this thing, but I trained NLP with you back in blah, blah, blah. And I was in the room when you were a newbie. It was and it's like, okay. I don't know. I think it's kind of maybe an ego thing. People want to look better than they are. They think maybe they're going to look less knowledgeable or less significant if they attribute. And I mean, it's happened throughout history, right? Like, it's like, I love Crowley, but it's like, oh, you got this from here, you got that from there. And him being him, it's like, I have created this, It's like, well, we found the books, we know, and this is, I remember Abraham Hicks, hanging out with John DiMartini and asking him stuff. And he's like, well, let me just tell you this, Esther and Abraham Hicks, I've met them. I've been around to their house. They have a big, massive library. And there's nothing that Abraham is channeling that you couldn't find in that library, And it's like, it's very common. I think it is classy to give attribution from where you get your threads. And yeah, one of my interests, exactly like you said, is I've created a new modality, which is a synthesis. I can't teach you chakras, kinesiology, Chinese medicine, NLP, Jungian psychology in this little book, right? All these things are deep, rich modalities unto themselves. So if I want people to get good at the stuff I'm doing, I would prefer if they went and did research and deepen their roots in these many different threads. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned hip hop, because I see this like both in like occultism and in hip hop, like in a similar way that a lot of like the mumble rap now, it's not giving credence to like the original like hip hop and stuff. There's like almost this divide with like the new school kind of mumble rappers type of thing, and then the old school boom bap kind of New York hip hop like lyricism. And yeah, I saw an interview once where one of the newer rappers was saying, no, I've created like a whole new style. I'm not influenced by any of that at all. And then they actually took some of his like lyrics and some of his styles, like, okay, well, you obviously got this from that and this from that. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, I listened to those, but like I didn't, people don't really want to admit or don't even realize that we're being influenced.
They don't realize, yeah. Well, nothing is created in a vacuum, right? Like you get any piece of art, any piece of work. I'm often more interested in the life of an artist than their actual art. 9 out of 10. There's many people I find that their life journey is interesting to me, and their art or their music is okay. But when I learn about who they are, I'm like, this explains so much, like the context of where someone grew up, what they had to overcome, the prevailing values in their formative era, all that. It just tells you so much about where they're coming from. And I think that's the key, is context is just everything.
Yeah. And I think hip hop again is a good example, because it's like very sample based. Like the sample, like hip hop is like a mishmash of all the different genres. It's like a center point where you can have like jazzy hip hop or like classical piano hip hop or, like heavy metal hip hop. And, the real like hip hop heads that, do it in, I guess, what we would consider the right way or the respectful way, are saying, okay, yeah, I sampled from this. And they're referencing, like, it's this constant sharing of like ancestry in a way. It's kind of like being like, people that, might have made like a disco track like 50 years ago. They've like sampled the loop, but then they're kind of reinvigorating the old as well, rather than just stealing it and saying, oh, I made this from scratch, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. But, I grew up in that culture and in my 20s, and a lot of rappers and producers and DJs around me, as they got older, they become funk and soul aficionados, and they really start to know their shit. And it's a bit similar to me of like, I started with all kinds of new age things and followed the thread and found myself in the kind of Western esoteric tradition. And it's like, okay, so this owes a big chunk to Judaism, and this owes a big chunk to ancient Egyptian mysticism. And it's like, oh, everything came from somewhere else,
Yeah, and I find that in like occultism versus New Age thinking, where, you get a New Age book, it's often talking about how they had this experience and downloaded this, and it's this like new modality. But then you look at like what I would consider like an authentic occult book, and the reading list at the end is like pages and pages and pages of references of like, and so it's just like a never ending, like tree or roots, right? Like I'd get one author that I like, and then I'd find what influenced him, and then I'd just before I know it, I would just be ordering all these different books from different authors and it goes back through the years. You can see Jung influenced this and this was expanded from that. And but I just don't see that as much in the New Age. I
think it's the commercialization factor. So the New Age is basically mumble rap in the analogy, right? Like it's like, oh, look, I created this thing. It's my own breathwork mixed with this. And it's like, it is a new thing. It's really cool. But there were people doing shit like this hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And I think it is nice to maintain an awareness of that stuff. And what I love about the New Age and what I love about the era we're in is we're not locked into lineage and tradition, because I'm really not a traditional person. Like I'm a person who wants to mix and match and develop things that suit me. And I dabble with this and dabble with that and try this and try that. And I find my own way. And I try to understand some of the principles of what I'm tinkering with before I do that. But I by no means have mastered, to create the spiral. I did not master Chinese 5-element theory. I had a basic kinesiology student level grasp, and lots of other pieces that are in there. It's like, I know what this is I'm a blue belt, but I'm not a black belt. And it's like to borrow from those places. I don't know why I have to use jiu-jitsu metaphors for everything, but it's the thing of you could be a great MMA fighter who's an average wrestler, pretty good boxer, intermediate jiu-jitsu fighter, but your combination is what's going to make you stand out,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, while we're on that, because it kind of segues into another topic that I wanted to talk about, in that also I find, over the years, a lot of the New Age community have kind of defaulted back to whatever religion they've grown up with and all that sort of stuff. And
Christians, Christianity, yeah.
And so I feel like I have a theory of why that is, and I'd love to hear yours as well. And there's also how I was going to explain it kind of ties into martial arts metaphors and stuff as well, in that I think the New Age belief system is because it's and not like a organized mismatch, like Hermetic magic, right? That's like a systemized, everything's got its place. Whereas New Age is like this just, kind of soup thrown together. And it doesn't actually have a structure where everything's hanging on. And so when people are in this intense situation, they default to whatever their default system is, like martial arts wise, right? You can tell if someone's actually ingrained the martial arts system in their body. If they're in a stressful situation, they have to instinctual. And if they, if you straight away, you're hey, I've been practicing martial arts all this time, blah, blah, boom. And in the situation, their fight or flight just goes into a ball or something like that. Obviously you haven't ingrained or installed that in your system. An example is, it was either in the Viking show or Last Kingdom. It's kind of run together in some instances for me. But one of the Christians was on a ship with all the Vikings, and apparently he converted to the gods, to Thor and Odin and stuff like that. And they were in this big storm, and he thought he was going to die, and he's like, Lord God, help me! And all the other, and then the storm stopped, and all the Vikings were looking at him and be like, what did you just say, motherfucker? Sort of thing. And I think that's a good example that he can say all he wanted that he converted, but deep down, when he's in that stressful situation and he thought he was going to die, he instinctually pulls out whatever his default system is. And so I think even though the New Ages say they're past Christianity, all that sort of stuff, if they have a plant medicine journey and there's all their shit comes up, if they have a traumatic experience, if they go into survival mode, regardless of what they say, they go to that default belief system. So I know that was a lot of stuff, but does that make sense? And I'd like to hear your say on that.
Yeah, well, I think so. I studied Buddhism in my early 20s at university. I studied comparative religion with an Eastern religion emphasis, right? That was where I just picked Eastern religion units and a few shamanic units and a few other bits and pieces, but as much Eastern philosophy stuff as I could do. I remember reading a Buddhist book towards the end of my second year, and it was, things were getting heavier and deeper, and it was more about the metaphysics of how karma functions and how when we die, there's these different layers of aggregated stuff, and they kind of gradually kind of peel apart. And like, basically a being is just layers of aggregates was kind of the language, and it was only just starting. I'm like, hang on a minute. There's no soul in here, and there's no God in this system. And I only then realized that I had been looking at this whole thing for, say, a year and a half to 2 years of, Buddhism. I'm meditating, I'm reading books, I'm whatever, with sort of an operating assumption that, of course, somewhere in the background, there is some being that is judging what's right or wrong and is going to, even though we're operating with karma, there must be some being that dishes out the karma, right? And it's almost, and then at a certain point, I was like, hang on, no. There's fucking nothing. And it was like I was sitting in the library at University of Queensland, and I was like, fuck. Because it was the moment where my own conditioning was actually revealed that I had been studying for 2 years with a pre-existing good, evil, right, wrong, Western Christian bias. And I wasn't raised heavily Christian, but it just as a backdrop, And so that was the first glint, like, I am operating from a Western Christian framework to begin with. And for me, what I think it is that, say someone's to embark on a magical pathway, or even to do New Age cleanly, ideally there would be a journey of deprogramming and deconstruction, But what we'll often find is you can hang out in the say, the Tantra community, and behind what everyone is practicing, they're doing their practices, they're doing their thing, there is still a sort of Christianity light operating in the background that is sort of determining how people value things, what they think is right or wrong, or which is not. I'm not saying it's even good or bad, but if you were genuinely committing to that path, it would be important to know that you have a pre-existing cultural bias, And to go back to the martial arts thing, I used to train Kung Fu, right? And someone would come and let's say they come from a Muay Thai background, and their stance would be all fucked. And no matter how many times they would try, they'd be going back to bouncing around, and the Sifu would be like, we don't stand like that, we do this. And it's like, yeah, that guy's trained for 3 years. He's got the Muay Thai habits. It's going to be a long time before his default becomes the new thing. And only if he really wants that and really starts to get to the nitty gritty of, like the Viking who's, his reflex. I think we should know that. And this thing that you're naming about the New Age doesn't really come with a coherent operating system. So you have people who, they're mixing law of attraction with kind of Amazonian and North American shamanic teachings with Eastern Buddhist and Hindu philosophy, and maybe a dash of kind of European Wicca light and some cacao or whatever. And it's like, okay, so these things all have different operating assumptions. Like they don't have the same cosmology. They don't have the same principles. They don't have the same rules. So essentially what you've got is someone with a very fractured way of interpreting the world. And I think unless they get some sort of meta frame that brings it all together and makes it make sense, they're actually going to have a bad time in life, because they're not going to have a coherent framework to make sense of significant life events, just to deal with their journey, because they're now operating on a confused sort of system. So I think that is one of the biggest problems with the New Age, is it's not really one thing.
Well, it's interesting because I think the thing with the New Age and stuff is that, because I've tried to introduce or offer people like a framework or try to find a framework, and I hear the same thing is like, oh, I don't really follow any particular kind of system or religion. I just kind of take what works for me. And back to the martial arts thing, I remember chatting to a friend of mine years ago who was like doing mixed martial arts, and I was like, oh, so what like main system do you use? Like, is it Muay Thai? He's like, oh no, it's like a mix of different things. I was like, yeah, but like Muay Thai is probably like your main standing, and then Jiu-Jitsu is like, as soon as you go to the ground. He's like, no, it's a mix of different things. And so I went to and trained with him a little bit, and like I'm not an expert, but I've experimented with a lot of different styles and looked into the background of them. And yeah, like his initial framework was essentially Muay Thai stance when he's standing, And then like as soon as he goes to the ground, it's jiu-jitsu game, right? And then he's mixed in some other little bits and pieces that he's learned from boxing and stuff along the way. But his framework is still standing Muay Thai, ground, jiu-jitsu. Like, but he didn't realize he had a system.
Right.
And like a lot of people don't realize that even if they're doing New Age, they're putting it on their old, rusty Christian of things.
You don't want to do bad stuff. You're going to go to hell. What? Did I say that? Yeah, you did. You still think what they told you in church school and in primary school, that's been gone in there. And I remember another incident earlier than the Buddhism one where I moved in with a guy who was a card carrying stuff that now to me seems cool, but at the time was really, he was like Enochian magic and super into like dark imagery and Geiger. I was like 16, he was so super into his kind of like demonic imagery and ceremonial magic, things that I now am very familiar, very comfortable with. I remember pulling books off his bookshelves and being like, it's got some goat head or whatever. And I'm like, if I read this, is like my soul at risk? And it was like, and I didn't know at the time, but looking a few years later, I was like, I'm conditioned. I'm conditioned that color scheme with that imagery means evil, and it's like people when they see a pentagram, they've only maybe seen it in horror movies and they have to kind of deprogram what they were first trained that means. What that means is it means not a cross is what it means for most people. It's the other guy, and then they have to go like, actually, this is the people who were like nature worship. Oh, okay, right. I didn't know that. And that's a journey. And I think, this is true of everything. I think it's true of my entrepreneurial philosophy and it's true of my magical and manifestation philosophy is your kind of deprogramming work, your cleanup work is really going to set the scene for how successful you are once you start getting further into trying to produce a result. Because if there's unconscious frameworks in the way, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I guess my next question would be because for instance, in the classical tantric model that I mainly teach and work from, it's kind of like, they call it the koshas, but it's like the 6 layers of self kind of thing. So you've got like, the physical layer, mind, emotions, then you've got the kind of prana subconscious layer, then you've got the void layer, and then you've got just in the midst of that, it's just awareness. And so it's interesting because I came from a very ceremonial magic background, which is all about, reinforcing the higher self to almost like, carry it on to multiple lifetimes. And then on the Eastern side, it's kind of saying the opposite of that. It's like, actually, no, your most core self is like not unique. Like your ultimate core self is the same thing that everything shares, and that's just consciousness or awareness. And so it's been difficult for me to kind of coalesce or remedy like the two conflicting views, like because you got magic, ceremonial magic, which is all very like, immortalize the self, and then whereas like, Eastern traditions like, well, there is no self kind of thing. So it's like, I love to, because you've delved into both of them as well, like what your current model is, like how to effectively unravel stuff and like, realize that it's all just a game, but then how do you choose what game you want to build again and what structure you want to build from and like what, just a little question.
Such a great question. It's really cool to even be asked that. So this is shit that I've worked with probably for years, but I came across a model through ISTA and through Bruce Lyon's work, which really helped me to reconcile East and West, which when I followed the roots of his ideas really comes out of the Theosophical Society, the Trans-Himalayan tradition, and that kind of thread, which a lot of people, theosophies can kind of, some people don't like it or whatever. And I got into it really quite young, but I got brought back to it. But this idea of a threefold self is something that they name it a different, depending on the lineage where you get it from. They name it different things, right? But Alice Bailey,
you go into it a bit more because you did mention it last time. But I actually tried to find info on it, and I found like a lot of his stuff, but there's not really anywhere which breaks down the system.
It's not cleanly. I feel like I'm going to build some pieces around this the way I work with it. But basically, we can think of the self and on the most expanded idea of the self, we can think of it on 3 layers. So let's call it the body, mind, or the personal self. So that Dane Thomas, nervous system, ego, body, mind. Great. And then we can move up to the soul, which would be the close to immortal, divine aspect of the self, but that still has an element of, it's still differentiated from oneness, right? So let's call that the soul, the spark of the divine that is still a separate spark, but knows on some level that it's divine, but it has its own. And then we've got the monadic level of the self, the one, right? So we could call it the personality, the soul, and the spirit would be one way to frame it. Those 3 have really given me a way of reconciling and integrating a lot of this stuff, because someone could throw you any piece of anything. Okay, we're going to do Tony Robbins. Great. That's body mind stuff. That's self-actualization. That's making Dane Thomas a more confident, more contributing, more effective member of society who's going to get his goals met. Great. What about past life work or, what about something like that? Well, that will be transpersonal soul level work. That would be on the part of me that is not locked into this body in this lifetime, that has been existing for a long time. Great. What about dissolving into the void, or like Eckhart Tolle, being in the beingness and realizing, or Ramana Maharshi, there is no self? Well, that is void. That is monadic. That is working directly with spirit or directly with life force. And we can, the categorization gets tricky because different people use different labels, but understanding that is 3 different levels of looking at the work, basically. And the Eastern traditions are very good at radical awakening stuff, realizing right now that I'm all of it. And in fact, the I is a construct. Oh my God, there's nothing. It just is. Great. The Western traditions are a lot more sophisticated, typically at evolutionary awakening. And some Eastern traditions as well. I shouldn't be, we're lumping a lot of stuff together. So for those who know their shit, forgive me, I'm doing big generalizations. But this evolutionary awakening journey is more like, and say bringing like Ken Wilber integral sort of stuff into the mix. Okay, I've developed this part of myself. Maybe this happens. So the Western esoteric traditions of initiation, like soul initiations, right? It's seen as a series of initiations you would go through potentially over multiple lives. And so we've got radical awakening, boom, right now. We've got evolutionary awakening that is essentially a developmental ladder. That's 2 very different ways of looking at spiritual work, what we're trying to achieve, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So that's helped me reconcile a lot of stuff in terms of, okay, this is soul work. This sort of, this kind of ritual calling down more of who I am, or even sort of connecting with the holy guardian angel, that kind of stuff. I sort of think of that as soul work in a very generalized sense. It's not dissolving into the one. It's more developing what is, but becoming more than a personality, right? So that's one map that's really been really helpful for me. But another thing is we have to basically pick what is the operating assumption of our journey. So I made an active transition from, even though I've spent the majority of my time with Eastern traditions, I, at the beginning of 2020, decided that magic would be the central framework that I would operate from. And that means that Tantra and Buddhist practice and anything else would be in service of magic. It wouldn't be the other way around. So basically I am not trying to become liberated. That's not my aim. I've dropped any aim of like, oh, one day I'll be enlightened. It's like, I'm not using that operating system. And I'm more operating from my take on a magical frame, which is I'm the micro of the macro, and my goals, as it were, is to manifest and experience the life that I want to have. That's the lower side of it. And the higher side is, and to realize myself as God, as cosmos, as we go along. But but not necessarily with and there'll be a certain state when I go, bing, I'm there. Like I'm not really holding that. And so I've sort of centralized the magical framework as the main one. And then that means that sort of tantric practice and so on is almost the fuel for this journey. You know, it's almost like Kundalini sort of work and all that is awakening the energetic force that I'm using to anchor this bridge between spirit and matter, which again, this idea that soul is the bridge between the spirit and the matter. So that, which is not present for the most part in the Eastern sort of frame, is that, okay, so if I mature the soul, it's the bit that can bridge between the little person and the infinite. And so that's kind of a snapshot into how I make sense of the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, that threefold system sounds like a simplified, like slightly different model of that one. But the way you see things is very similar to me, because I guess, I feel like it's like, you know, in alchemy, it's like you dissolve something and then you create something new, right? I feel like the tantric stuff is like all about dissolving all the different layers until you're just your awareness and you're like, oh, wow, I've been playing all these different games without realizing, but now I'm like in the void and I can create the game or I can choose what to play. So it's like, okay, do I want to choose these existing games or should I create something new? And I feel like the path of magic is starting to add more layers, but consciously add it. Because I mean, the thing is, like, we start off as a kid as a sponge and then we're adding layers and layers and layers and layers. And so I think a lot of people that go into the New Age world, they're just adding more and more layers.
Yes.
And they end up like this big clunky ball of like, you know, like it's like you get the leftover Play-Doh and stuff on top, and it's just like can't even roll straight because it's all like crooked and
100%. It's like, I'm a shaman now. It's like, yeah, but you never actually dealt with the kid who got bullied in grade 10. So we've got him still there with a short-term career veneer, and now you're the shaman. And they're all kind of jarring against each other and limiting. And it's like, it's the Solvay coagula thing, you know. It's like you go do some more Solvay. Go and fucking clean up work, you know. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and so that's what I'm finding as well. That like I guess the gap I see in like the classical tantric system is that once you get to that awareness, there's a bit of an aversion to recreate any kind of identity. You know, like, and that's the thing as well. Like, there's such a issue in that, like, we're essentially all householders, so we're doing tantra without even realizing it. We're all like influenced by renunciate-based yoga. So we're influenced by renunciate-based yoga. Even the sutras talks about like, which is like taught in every yoga teacher training, and like he's actually talking about how the body is this like disgusting, horrible thing that you need to like, you know, separate from and ignore. And so there's a couple of things. I think that leads into obviously your esoteric entrepreneurship type of stuff that you're doing, where kind of trying to help the spiritual community to reconnect with wealth and, you know, all that sort of aspect, because I think we've been engraved both from Christianity, where it's like material bad, spirit good, give us all your money, we'll take care of it for you so you can get into heaven. And then the renunciate-based yoga stuff. But also what you touched on earlier is that I'd love to chat about death with you in the way that, like, I think we can rebuild, you know. So okay, I'll see if I can frame this properly. So I understand once we unwrap all the layers, right, and then we can start to build the life we want consciously and adding layers and personality and all that sort of stuff. But I think the only thing that we can never really truly know, and it comes down to like the essence of spiritual work, is how do we figure out, or how do we get the best possible idea of what happens after death? And I think the East and West, whereas like the East seems to see rebirth as a punishment, whereas a lot of the West sees it as like a beautiful thing. It's like, I love this place. I love this game. Like, I want to come back, but I want to come back with a leveled up character, and I want to come back to a better world that I left it. And you know what I mean? So I want to build more here. I want to evolve myself because I want to keep coming back. I want to keep respawning to play the game. Whereas like the Eastern, like, kind of want to get out of that. And I'm seeing that more so that most people want to escape. Like, everyone's starseeds now wanting to escape Earth. It's like, I fucking love it. Like, so yeah.
Yeah. So I had a close friend die at the beginning of 2020. And it, you know, there's the initial personal grief shock stuff, which was significant. Then as it kind of rippled through, it was me looking at my life and my framework of what I believe and where do my, because I'm dealing with like, fuck this guy, he's dead. And I could feel like almost that blow almost revealed where a lot of my beliefs, where the overlaps are like, we're incongruent. We're not in integrity, because it'd be like, I'd be half thinking about other realms one day of like, oh, maybe he's like here now, and it was just like, hang on a minute. What I'm actually confronted with, if I'm deadly honest, is I don't fucking know. And because I had quite a strong Buddhist absorb of like, oh yeah, reincarnation, and it's like, hang on a minute. And I got this real skeptical wave move through me of almost like a whole bunch of beliefs just got made visual, and I was like, cool. Do I know that? No. Would I back that? Would I really hinge my life on that thing there as a truth? It's like, no. That's a piece of something that I absorbed when I was 21 that gave me a new frame, and I kept it dear. But actually, now that something real has happened, like this is actually a real spiritual initiation, I realize that 85% of the shit that I believe, I have no fucking idea whether that's true. It's just something that I took on because I did, or out of comfort. And so what I started looking at, and I think this is where I like to be fucking as ruthless as possible, because, because something's 800 years old or whatever, we tend to go, oh, it's a holy teaching. Like, why would these people, whether we're talking medieval Christians or classical tantrics or whatever, why would they be inspired to create these systems that have the biases in that they do? Well, for one, life is fucking hard. You know what I mean? They weren't, it wasn't just a cruise. It wasn't just a good time. It wasn't like, I'm just achieving my dreams and creating cool stuff. It was like, quite a lot of suffering. Yeah. Why does stoicism doesn't come out of California in the 80s? It comes out of like fucking rugged, Roman, and, it comes out of like tough times and tough places. And like, I think this is because I find classical tantra very clean and very compatible with how I see the world. But I still think, yeah, it comes from a realm where people didn't have shit, life was short, life was cruel. Buddhism also, like life is suffering. Even that is a central principle. It's like, that's the first observation. Like, that's your first most important observation you want to tell me, is that this is suffering. You could look at it 100 different other ways. That is not, and it almost feels taboo to say. It's like, that is not a fundamental truth of existence. It is an operating assumption, and perhaps an incredibly useful one, arguably, but not. And so what happened for me is like, okay, so all these fucking systems, which I have pedestaled to a degree, I love Tantra, I love Buddhism, I love such and such, they all have an inbuilt bias, and they haven't come out of a vacuum. They've come from a specific culture in order to make sense of life within that culture, in order to help people evolve, people make meaning, etc. And I think that, what the death piece forced me to accept was, I don't know.
Yeah.
So let's start there, and my goal is to, as much as I can, stay there. And so,
yeah,
which is working with the mystery, right? With the mystery traditions, it's like, okay, the first thing is, you don't know shit, and I'm going to fucking beat you and put a bag on your head, and you navigate through some maze and consume it. You're going to be incredibly disoriented to the point where you realize, how confident are you of all that shit that you learned? It's like, actually, I am fucking nobody, and I don't know shit. It's like, cool, that's a good start. Let's start there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because like I feel like there's two main streams of like magic, whereas like, you're focusing on like in classical tantra, they call it Bodha and Boga. So like Boga is like focusing on the material, like doing well in the world, and then Bodha is like kind of like related to the Buddha, kind of like being like completely liberated. But the thing is, like, you can test how well you're doing in the world by, I guess, how happy you are, how much stuff you have, how successful you are. But how do you test if you're like starting to immortalize your consciousness. Because what I realized, and I'd love to ask you the same thing, is that, okay, if I can rebirth, because it makes sense that everything else is recycled and transformed in some way, so it makes sense that consciousness is recycled in some way. But what part continues, right? Because if it's our memory, like I don't think I'm going to take my memory because I don't remember anything from my current past life. Is it like our personality? But really, if we unpack those layers, like what is personality? So it's like,
right.
I've heard of the idea that we leave a shade behind. So it's like basically up until the point that I die, there's like an imprint of that Daniel from this lifetime, which I can tap back into, but my actual core essence has like been moved on and recycled. So I guess, for example, with your friend who passed, you could like contact a shade of him, which would be him, like it would be him up until that point where he passed, but then like the core essence or consciousness of him would already be moving on to some other kind of idea. And again, these are I'm not saying that this is like reality. I'm just saying kind of, because that's the thing that people don't realize. People talk about these stuff with such conviction, but this is a model. Like ask me in a year, I might have a completely different idea. So,
like if someone close to you dies or whatever. But so here's where I come at with, and this is not embedded in everyone's approach to magic, but mine is basically along like I'm primarily working with the here and now and aligning the here and now to my desire, but also to my highest aspect of who I could be. So basically and I'm very selective of what frames and belief systems basically to me, like true spiritual practice would result in less belief systems, not more, So like the less I have going on around stories of this or that, the more I'm actually centered and at peace with what is. I would mark that as spiritual success. I'm here and I'm centered and I'm not attached to what's going on and I'm not, and then material success is, to me, or magical material success is like how skillful am I at producing fulfillment in the realm of my life, So it's almost, so I'm constantly kind of typically working with two almost contradicting paths, but I also have a deep sense that they actually lead to each other, Like if you follow the desire path and you get all the shit that you want, you're actually going to burn through a lot of karma and work out like, I was just following that because of something unresolved and now I've met that. And, like it's like the Jim Carrey path of like, I got all the things and now I'm semi-awakening, but I needed to become famous and achieve this and achieve that. And it's like, like he's kind of had a Eckhart Tolle path from success, right?
Yeah.
And the other side is, as we deepen that alignment with the cosmos, it gets easier to create what you want. Paradoxically, you want less anyway, but there is, the more access to the non-dual that you have when you do deal with 3D dual reality, it's very easy to navigate through because it's just not so much friction on you. So to me, both paths actually can serve each other. But, as to the like what happens after death and all that, not only am I not worried about it, I actively kind of don't want to get involved with that shit because I see it as actually taking me out of what I'm actually here to do. And so when I hang around with spiritual people who have just so much fucking content of like, well, this and that, and then I had this taxi driver, the Uber driver, telling me about his like ascension to the the Akashic records and through the angelic realms and the whatever. And I'm just at the end, I'm just like, cool. You still drive a fucking Uber, like your magic ain't that good. At least not for me. That was an impressive, rich story of this awakening that he had and traveling through all these realms in like exquisite detail. But I'm like, do I want them? Like, I don't care about that. I'm here and now exactly where I mean to be. And that just actually, so he was sharing it like it was this big spiritual achievement. And I'm like, it kind of sounds like a distraction from anything that I regard as like real or useful. And which is very specific to me. I understand I'm not writing that off of that someone's real really what fulfills them. But for me, it's like, okay, you're hitting me with a lot of 5D fluff, you know, like it's.
Yeah. And that's the thing as well, that like, I liked that you were saying that you like getting more spiritual for you means like letting go of more identities and more attachment things. And I find it's the opposite, because people are like basing their entire business, their entire personality about being a reincarnated Egyptian priestess, or, you know, being like a Lemurian princess, which like Lemuria from Greece is actually like land of the lemurs, like kind of thing. It's like people don't research where these things are from. It's like, it's funny as well that, you know, you can actually trace the history of some of these ideas, but they've created this whole narrative, which I understand like is fine. But for example, I can be a rune mage, right? I can be a ceremonial magician and summon, you know, demons and stuff. But like I can step inside those personalities when I need to, and then I step back and I'm Daniel, the guy who's just doing a podcast with, you know, Dane Thomas. Yeah. I have many different personas and avatars kind of thing. Whereas, yeah, like even though I've had some experiences of like, I guess what could be deemed as like a flashing back of my past life, I also know that I watched Black Sails and love pirates. And, you know, you know what I mean? It's like how so many people have so much conviction about these experiences, but people forget we grew up on like movies and all this sort of stuff that's like
100%. And, you know, it's not that I completely diminish the experience, you know, like I've had plenty of fascinating experiences, but I like it was always so, and in this past life, I'm like, you know, you realize there's really no past life. Like if we were to get out of this dimension, it would be all unfolding like at the same time, right? You do understand that. So I understand that for you, it's your past life, but also maybe that's just a resonance with something in the field. Like maybe that's just, you just got a snapshot of that because you did an ayahuasca journey, or because we did the hypnosis, or because you were lucid dreaming or whatever. We are very, I prefer to bring a degree of pragmatism and sort of scientific thinking to all this stuff. Because if we don't do that, what happens is it just becomes a license to like make believe about everything.
Yeah, everything's led by UPG.
Yeah, and that's really risky, because you could just bullshit away your entire life, you know. And, you know, the Lemurian princess who's building her business around that, again, nothing wrong with that, but where is the transpersonal integration? Are you also just Margaret, you know? And what is Margaret like? And has Margaret got some unresolved shit that makes her really badly need to be a Lemurian princess? Because that's what I'm interested in. And that's what you can feel when you hang out with someone like, there's something fucking incongruent here. And it's like, yeah, she goes there to avoid dealing with the fact that she was raped, or that she was bullied, or that she had a boring life as an accountant for 15 years and then had this fucking thing. And it's like, I don't want to take it away from anyone, but I also, there is shit that is more anchored in the here and now, that is like, how's your nervous system doing? Are there elements of your personality that you haven't really dealt with? Because those two levels are always related to each other.
Yeah, I agree. And like, it's tricky because the more I learn, like start to understand the workings of magic and like the whole placebo, nocebo kind of thing, like the more that we can convince and play that role, the more it actually becomes real, and like people respond in the way that it is real. But I think it's getting to the point where people, like, especially in the spiritual business ecosystem, where the credibility is actually having that identity. And it's something that we don't see in like normal things. Like, for example, you know, you wouldn't get surgery by a surgeon who said that they were a surgeon for the past 20 lifetimes and they just downloaded, you know, surgery, and be like, well, you know, I'm not taking that away from you, but can I get the old mate who's done 20 years in medical school instead? Because I'm not sure if I want to let you cut me open while I'm asleep. Whereas like in the spiritual realm, that it's much more credible. You know what I mean? Like, you know, someone who's done 5 years of practice in somatic therapy is probably going to get trumped by someone who has 2,000 years of downloaded, you know, you know what I mean?
And it depends who's doing the shopping. I think there are plenty of people who are grounded and who are discerning, moving through spiritual quote unquote spiritual journeys and stuff. And then there's people who are naive or lost or just not grounded. And that's, again, not to shame any particular stage of the journey, but it's, and it's funny that you pick an example of something like The Surgeon, which is very anchored to life and death. So suddenly we get a little more practical, but when it's like, oh, I want to journey to whatever, it's like, well, there's no risk, right? I'm not going to die if the Lemurian channeler is bullshitting me or delusional. Nothing that bad's going to happen. Maybe I just waste $150 or $2,000 or whatever, but I'm not going to fucking die on the table. Whereas when it comes to, a airline pilot or a surgeon or someone, fucking putting a new roof on your house, it's like, I want a track record because I don't want the roof of my house collapsing. And when it's like, well, I'll read your palm, it's like, well, how, and this is the risk of dealing with the insubstantial, is people can switch off their discernment when they deal with that stuff.
But it's tricky because I get it, because like we want the show, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter how good the meal is, we want the show as well to kind of, and that's the thing as well, because it adds so much, like I see magic sometimes and ritual as like putting on a show for myself. Like I could just sit there, meditate and be like, I want to manifest this, but I was like, it's so much more fun to put on candles and put on a hood and like, call Beelzebub or, like chant names and stuff like that. And I convince a deep part of myself that I've done whatever I need to do it.
Well, this is for me is when I do some magic for the joy of doing magic, and I do other magic to get results. But then there's whole periods where I don't do magic to get results because I can feel that I'm already aligned and all I have to do is reach out and get that thing. And so it doesn't look very magical, but that's a result of previous work that, like, I'm pretty sure my conscious and unconscious are pretty much in agreement that we can have that result. It's like, do I need to do a ritual? You really don't. Just go and get the thing. Just go and, lift the weights or sell the thing or go on the holiday or whatever the thing you were, trying to line up. If I get a sense that I'm aligned to it, because I know I can do magic as much as I want and I have had awesome results, and I do have a strong belief in its efficacy, but particularly combined with action, it's kind of part of the formula that I like.
Yeah.
I also realize, if something's already aligned, you don't need to do shit. It's already, the thing that the magic would get you is already here because you are already congruent for the outcome,
Yeah.
And so I think that's whatever stage of the journey I'm on, that's a realization of, and then there's other magic I'm doing, which is more simply about connecting to the essence of magic. It's not trying to get me anything. Yeah. It's just, it's like Qigong practice, right?
Kind of thing.
Totally. Wonder, play, flow.
Yeah. And that's similar to me, yeah. Like I'll start making a sigil up, and then before I even go to do the ritual to load the sigil, like it's already happened. And I'm like, fuck, I want to do the thing. So I end up just doing ritual, I guess, to reinstall, like to re-enliven the magic and make me realize that I don't know everything and there is mystery and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, we're just getting low on time, so I just want to quickly touch on a couple little things. And so it kind of connects to this because, I like anyone who's listening who might be offended like about all this, Lemurian princess stuff. Like I completely get it, and that's the thing as well. I want to ask you how to find that balance between it because I love playing, the role, and I love. I think it's really important to add flavor and fun and wonder to life. But I guess when it gets out of control and you're losing, So I guess my few questions. So one that's personal to me at the moment is that one thing that's really holding me back at the moment is that I guess being a cis white male in now focusing on Tantra and my whole business model is like a classical tantric school, and things have happened recently to kind of point just like all the witch hunt stuff that's going on at the moment. And like, how do you deal with, I guess, trolls to a certain extent? But the thing is, like, I think that people need to learn more critical thinking, and it leads to more of the unpacking and stuff we were talking about before. But like, how do you deal with all because you are actually one of the rare people that have a sense of humor as well, in that, like, I don't know, we can like be in mage mode or wizard mode and like do everything super serious. But then as soon as I step out of the ritual chamber, I can make jokes about it. And I know if I've just gone on a tangent, but yeah, like how do you deal? Because what I'm currently dealing with, I find that I'm not wanting to be too successful or too much out there as being seen, because I'm worried that basically like the people will
They're going to come for you. Going to come and cancel you. Yeah. It's fucking very relevant, very timely question, I think. And, you know, I've journeyed this stuff probably more than most people, I think. I've had a few rounds of semi getting cancelled or getting bad, you know, press or whatever. And look, I think it's part of the initiation of leadership, you know, and I think that it is the primary area of shadow work of emerging leaders that you need to some degree, like, let's put it in perspective, right? Doing this kind of work in a certain place or time could literally get you fucking burned at the stake or murdered or whatever. Doing it in this time and upsetting some people could get people talking about you in a Facebook group. Somehow we live in an era where the second one is scarier than the first one. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to get cancelled. And it's like, what do you actually mean? Are they going to come murder you? No, they're not going to do that. Are you doing anything to get you put in jail? No, I'm not doing anything illegal. Okay, so getting cancelled means what? You get a bad reputation on the internet? Is that what we're really talking about? It's like, well, that's usually what people mean, right? And I think that's where the integration work is, whether it's an existential kink or clearing or doing ritual that has you step into that thing and own it, you know, like it's very interesting. Like I have played with a bit of a cult leader image and brand, and actually inside my containers, I've spent a lot of time trying to learn how to create containers where people are safe to express contradicting opinions, where they can ask for what they want. You know, the new thing I've just built, we've purposely designed it so no one is locked into anything. It's a pay by the month thing, which I see as a counterbalance to the coaching industry's get you and lock you down dynamics. Is like, no, we want everyone to be here by consent and because they love it. And if they don't love it, then they are free to leave with full love. Not this like, yeah, you didn't fucking do the work, fuck off kind of thing of like, hey, not everyone fits everything. It's okay. So it's just really trying to reverse engineer the things that make things a bit culty. But at the same time, you know, I'm aware that some of the things that I'm doing make me a bit of a, like, who the fuck is this guy, you know? And like,
I'm interested in your response to that, in that, like, do you feel the best approach is to not do anything about it? Or, because I just very aware of how humans work. And, you know, even though, like, for example, even though I know that what people say isn't necessarily the truth at all, or even close to it, I still notice that I'm affected by, if I don't know someone, the first time I meet them, I instantly get like the stories running. And even though I'm conscious of it, I can still feel it in my body running these stories. And so, like, do you feel that it's important to like address these things publicly? Just say someone is like talking about you, you know, and creating stories. Do you think it's important to say your side, or like, yeah, I'm just interested in the approach? I guess for me, it's like, what actions do I need to take to make sure that I have the best possible chance of like not being misunderstood and not being misrepresented?
Give that shit up. You're going to be misunderstood. Like, you know, you're teaching tantra and magic and whatnot. 99% of the planet is not going to understand what you're doing. Like, wow, how the fuck would they? You know, this is where I love Crowley. This is where I go back and this guy was doing what? When? In Victorian England? How did this guy not get fucking put in jail? It's like, I actually think because he owned that persona so strongly, people just were fucking either terrified, in awe, on a pedestal. And like, it largely was an act. It largely was just stepping all the way into a character type, not all in, I'm not even saying in necessarily healthy ways as well. Like, but what I've noticed is, well, here's an underlying principle for me. Everyone is dealing with their own projections all the fucking time. So there's people that fucking hate me and they don't really know very much about me, you know? And it's like, I know full well what sort of archetypal territory I've stepped into, what I'm representing to people, and it's like, well, yeah, you haven't dealt with that. It's not my job to come and make you fix it. It's not up to. I don't own the internet. If someone's going to write some fucking shit about me, unless it's and there's levels, like touch wood. Like I also don't. I'm saying this very casually. I also don't enjoy that shit. I'll be clear. Like I'm still a person. I don't really like reading some negative thing about myself. But I mean, there is no one, and I mean no one, that has any level of public exposure that hasn't have to deal with this. And the bigger you go, one of the things I learned from John Demartini was, whatever level of praise you want, you need to be okay with the equivalent level of blame. If you want 100,000 people to love you, well, accept that 100,000 other people will probably hate you with equal intensity. And if you can accept, this is the non-dual, right? If you can accept that whole spectrum, you get to have that impact on 200,000 people. You want to go bigger? Well, you better be okay with accepting more blame and more praise, and realizing that they're both like distorted perceptions. And what's the reality? The reality is I'm a person sitting here eating my toast and someone's writing about me like I'm the Antichrist and I eat babies or whatever. And it's like, what did I even do? Oh, you don't like the tone of my marketing. You think that,
Yeah, and see, that's what I'm still really working on, like the frustration, because like even not just me, like for example with your stuff, like I've never met you in person, but I've like done quite a few of your programs now, and even like I remember once like where I saw you were creating like a magic school, and it triggered something in me because it was similar to what I was doing. But I messaged you, and like I think I was quite frustrated, and you so calmly, like so gracefully, just like, hey bro, like I see where you're coming from, and like I think those are the kind of interactions where I realize the difference in people, where like people think, you're like this like evil dark wizard, causing stuff, whereas like you seem to me one of the most like compassionate together humans, and even in situations where it could like, I don't know, yeah, whereas like a lot of people are the opposite, but they're the ones, it frustrates me sometimes, and I guess I have trouble letting that shit go, like, to be honest.
I think it's, and again, I don't feel that I live this 100%, but it's increased year by year. I think it's about realizing it's all a game, like all the way through, not just social media is a game, fucking life is a game. If you're really going to live this tantric, like Leela, right? The play, it's a play. If you really want to live this philosophy of like, okay, I'm incarnated, I am consciousness in a body experiencing existence, well, how is that not a game? It makes me think of, Rick and Morty, where they play that game where it's like you go and live the life of the person, and it's like, and Morty does it like seriously, and Rick just goes off script, and he's just running wild because he knows he's in a simulator, so he just does whatever the fuck he wants, Yeah. Morty, like, he's like, whoa, you went back to the carpet store after you recovered from cancer, Morty? Oof. And it's like, 60 years, and he's worked in this furniture store for 40 years of it in the simulation. Meanwhile, like, they're like, whoa, Rick's just taken Mike off grid. He's gone wild. I never seen anyone do that before. And it's like, yeah, that person knows they're in a simulation, and you can tell. And so I feel like if we're talking magic, if we're talking tantra, if we're talking any of this stuff, like, how much are we actually prepared to live it? Like I see people in the mystery school world, and all they talk about is dying and put your ego on the altar. But when someone comes after something that they're attached to, it's super fucking triggered and reactive about it. It's like, hang on a minute. You taught me the idea that we just offer it all up and that life will take us. But not except over here, and it's like, well, no, like if we're going to play this game, let's play it all out, and also have some compassion, because most people, and I don't mean this in some matrixy red pill kind of way, but most people are still living in reactive, survival-based stuff. So whether it's the angry online feminist, or whether it's the fucking conspiracy people do not like me, because every 6 months I do some post about there's no conspiracies, it's all fucking fear-based shit, which is not entirely what I believe. They get so upset, and they say that I'm like a government shill or whatever. And I'm just like, what about me thinks you think that I'm like in alignment with the government? We've got to see it as a game and accept that 80% of the people are deeply entrenched in their own reactivity, and
I
You just got
guess
to treat, they're most people are spiritually children. And so we've got to be gentle with them.
I guess the issue there for me is that I think we are in like the game that we're playing is all one big sandbox, and that like, there's actually no rules to the game. It's like whoever is the loudest, that's the game we're playing. But like a lot of people think that, there is actually like a set game. There's like ways to win, ways to lose. There's the good guys and the bad guys. And I see where they're coming from, and I have compassion for that. And I guess the non-dualist part of me is like, I see where you're coming from, but if you could just like come over here and like we could just like chat, I could show you that like, but then they just like refuse to. And especially with modern communication with social media and stuff, it's
polarizing. It's based on polarity, Whereas for me, I'm honestly not that entrenched in trying to get someone to change their position. They're fully entitled to their position. I think it's that I've referenced Crowley a lot in this conversation, but like he's this idea that like our job is to live our will and we should leave other people's will the fuck alone. That's one part of his that I'm fucking all about that. It's like, if you're all about chastising people on the internet, that sounds like a great life. Have the best time, Meanwhile, I'm going to do another conversation like this about stuff that I like. I make money. I date people that I like. I pursue interests that fulfill me. I hang out with awesome people. I'm fucking winning, man. And it's largely because I focus 99.9999% on what I like and where I want to go. And sometimes things piss me off and bum me out, but my refractory period is gotten real quick. Okay, next. It's just like,
what's the main tool that you find helps with that like you would give, because I think a lot of people like are struggling with it in this modern world, like afraid of getting too big because they don't want to deal with the stuff behind it.
Yeah, but it's like, let's flip. One is I work a lot with my vision. I've been doing this for years, and it didn't have an instant impact when I started. It had a minimal obvious impact, but I think over a decade plus it's compounded, where most days, definitely each week, I'm reading over what I've written for myself for this year, occasionally flashing 5 years or 10 years ahead, but I'm reviewing constantly the month, the quarter, the year, and I vision, and I sit with that, and I'm like, okay, and I feel into like, am I still on track for that? Do I still feel good about that? That's my primary North Star. That's what I'd care about. Even if I, touch wood, got locked in jail tomorrow, I'd be like, okay, what can I achieve from here? What do I want from here? Well, I can probably get good at meditation and fucking push-ups, my range has been reduced, but within that, what can I live, So from this life, which is pretty good and pretty expansive, I'm mostly trying to focus on where I want to go and what I like and being grateful for it and getting after it and all that sort of stuff. But I also like to flip things a bit quantum and go like, okay, so there's this big fear that you do some unnamed thing. So it's helpful to work with fears and shadows as well. And look at, okay, so what's this thing that you're afraid is going to happen? What you get, you suddenly have 10x more followers and suddenly you get canceled for something. What does that specifically mean? What does cancelled mean? Can you run through that and look at how if that actually happened tomorrow, when the situation came to you, you would actually deal with it. It's the same as like, I don't want to get cancer. But if I fucking get cancer, the day that I find out, I'm sure I'll be bummed out, but then I will gradually adjust and start to go, okay, well, this is what it is. What are we going to do? How do we want to do this? The thing that I think is important is not only do I focus on the thing that I want, but I like to look at the reversals, the fears. What are the fears that are in the way, and get to know them and get to meet them and feel like, well, if that happened, what would I do? Because there's heaps of things that I have feared that have happened. And on the day they happened or the day after they happened, it's like, that's not as bad as how I thought it was, That's one side. The other side is to reverse it all around and look at the cost of not doing. Like, let's say you want to build an online influential presence and you really would like that, but you're holding back because you're scared of getting criticized or attacked. The real cost here is not, the biggest risk for most people is they're not going to do what they want to do. That's the biggest risk. It's not that some hate mob is going to destroy them. It's that they're not going to reach their goals. They're not going to live their dreams. That is a much scarier risk if you give it adequate attention than, yeah, what if some people online that I don't know make my life difficult by waging some fucking bullying campaign against me? Like, that could happen, but I would be much more scared of being 80 and going, I really held back. Fuck. Yeah. I had some shit I wanted to say. I had some shit I wanted to create. And I feel like I only did 10% of it. And now that time is running out, I actually feel pretty shitty about that. I don't think I'd be there at 80 going, fuck, I wish that when I was 43, those people didn't bully me for that whole week, Yeah. Like, for that whole 2 weeks of my life where they called me names and I was worried I was going to lose my livelihood, and then it basically went away. That won't be the memory. The memory will be, fuck, I played it safe. So I would put more focus on that as a valid fear than this nebulous thing of like, the internet Karens are going to come to me and what are they going to do? Like, I know absolutely awful people who are on the internet that are massive, that have done much more egregious things than me. And Andrew Tate's kicking ass. I mean, he's in jail, but he's got cancelled for now, but his internet reach hasn't gone down. It's probably gone up, Is it even real? I don't fucking know. But I know that that's not the thing I'm mostly worried about. And I'm also, it's still a thing. I have worried about it. Every now and then something arcs up and I'm like, oh, is this going to be the time? But it's like, what for? You said a weird thing. You put out a picture of Baphomet with your head on it. Nobody cares that much. They don't care that much.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I really like what you said about the opposite of actually making the other pain point worse in not achieving it. So that really lands for me. And I guess as well, it's probably, helps with what you're doing with the esoteric entrepreneur as well, because I think what I notice more than ever, because I've been kind of doing my own thing for the last 6 or 7 years. I don't have coworkers. When I used to work in sales, if I'd have a shitty day, I'd go home to other people oh, I had this guy and he was a dick, and oh yeah, I had this person. It felt that camaraderie, and I felt backed up. Whereas I feel I'm starting to try to get people on board and stuff and build a team, but yeah, it feels very lonely on this kind of path. And I feel I'm the only one going through this kind of thing. But I guess being in some of your containers, it's made me even just feel that this isn't such a big thing.
There's many others doing the same journey, have similar fears, similar obstacles. That's a big part of what I'm sort of touting with the esoteric entrepreneur, beyond we'll teach you how to do this stuff and we'll do this. It's also having a community of people that are on the same path, that are all cheering you on. Because if you're an entrepreneur in spiritual circles, at least half of your circle doesn't give a shit about your business aspiration, even not 80%. And even if they think it's cool, they probably aren't on the same path, and they're definitely not. They're not going to cheer for you doing a 20 grand month. That's not their world. Whereas being in an environment where I've had that has really helped me go you guys want me to do better. That's amazing. Versus people who are it's a bit weird. Why are you trying to be big? It's because it's people to go on the spiritual journey was a black sheep thing. They have to go and find their spiritual community. Entrepreneurs from the spiritual community need to do that again, because your spiritual non-entrepreneurial friends, then they're not going to help you. They can't. It's not their fault, but they don't really understand what you're going to have to go through.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, thank you, bro. That we've gone a bit over time, but yeah, that helped me a lot in a lot of the questions I wanted to ask. And yeah, I think it was some really good topics we touched on. And yeah, do you want to speak a little bit more into the esoteric entrepreneur before we go?
Yeah, love to. So it's my new thing. After a year and a half of running launches and 8-week containers and doing a bit of research and finessing things, I've decided to open a container that will run for 3 years. It's just starting right now. People can join for as long or as short as they want. It's a month-by-month membership. We recommend people come for 3 months or 12 months, an actual amount of time. But the structure is such that every month we drop new teachings, we run rituals, we do self-pleasure and sex magic every Sunday. And it's essentially a cross between a mystery school and a business mastermind. So some of it is on the exoteric, on the getting stuff done, on the achieving, on the building, and some of it is on the inner work. We work with the moon cycle. We work with daily planetary alignment stuff. We work with the middle pillar. We work with some cool esoteric stuff and a lot of sort of master planning and design stuff and accountability. But we also teach all kind. I've got a faculty of 8 people, ranging from embodiment, ritual magic, sexuality, marketing, regular business, tech support. Like, we've got the whole thing built in. And the idea here is it's a place that if you're a spiritual entrepreneur anywhere on the journey, just if you're a spiritual entrepreneur with a drive to have an impact, you can come be part of this, and it's going to, at the minimum, save you a lot of time. Like, if you're driven, you'll get where you want to go eventually, but I reckon I can shorten your journey by 3 or 5 years because we've brought in everything we can. And also just teaching people how to self-source power, how to be connected to their purpose, how to work with the ebb and flow. So when it's not a culture of like hustle 24/7, it's like a culture of hustle while we're at the full moon, and then relax a little as we come back down again, and be cyclic like nature.
Yeah.
So it's not sit on your ass and do nothing. It's not work your ass off. It's like find your own ebb and flow that is natural to your cycle. And the sense is when you get your inner and your outer aligned, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing that, bro. Yeah, I'm really interested to see how it all unravels.
Yeah, we have our opening ritual on the new moon on Sunday, and then I'm teaching a bunch of stuff on planning and packaging and how to, so we rotate through 3 subjects: money, magic, and mastery. So every month we rotate through one of those. And the first one is money, and we're doing how to package for the year and how to make the money you want. And then we'll switch more into like sigil magic, that kind of stuff. And we just move through the year with different cool things that I think what I want to do is build a culture of spiritual entrepreneurs that are powerful at creating what they want.
Yeah, and doing, I guess, the things like from what I've seen in your containers is like, doing the things that are uncomfortable and aren't just the things that you're doing, because then you're not really growing and evolving if you're doing the same shit. So, awesome, bro. Well, thank you again for like taking time to come on here. And didn't get through all the questions I wanted to ask you, but it leaves an opening for
bring me back. I love the subjects. I really appreciate it. I like talking on these subjects. Is really fun.
Sweet. Is there any last little Dark Wizard with the wisdom you wanted to leave the podcast with?
Not really. I mean, come find me on Instagram. That's a good portal into my world. It's Dane.Thomas, no H in Thomas. And I just think it's like, the real thing is it's okay to be you. That's really what I want people to get from me. It's like, it's okay to find your own weird and wonderful way of doing this life. And, it's not like fuck everyone else, like in an aggressive way, but it's like, don't worry about what other people are doing and saying. Like we all know deep down what we are here to do and what we are, or at least we know what we're lit up by, and it's usually that we're getting confused by the other voices around us, whether that's personal or on the internet or whatever. And I feel like it's just about permission of like, whatever it is you are lit up by, you get to do that. Like, it's your life. You can do whatever you want.
All right. Well, till next time, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to and being a part of this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. I've been your host, Daniel Arulian Cumming. A massive thank you to Dane Thomas for joining me again. And if you would like to find anything we mentioned in this episode or more of what either of us do, you can find it below on the show notes or at houseofmages.com. Thank you again, see you next time, and make yoga magic again.